So thanks everyone for joining. What we want to talk about are some things that we think are really important to our teams. And so these are people that we mentor or people that teams that we lead or people we work with. And so one of the things that came up when we were talking about this was learning more than a few tools or languages. And I don't know who wants to start in on that, but I will let you wave your hand and kind of take over since we seem to have a sync problem with audio and video too. So I think with this, we were talking about knowing more than just R and Python and really being able to give experiences from different points of view.
Yeah, I'll start, I guess. So over the years, I mean, when I started my career, SAS was the dominant language, and that was what everybody used in business. That is now way out of favor, even though it's still used quite a bit in certain industries. So, you know, I think learning techniques and understanding basic principles is one of the most important foundations that you can have, because some of the specific tools, a lot of them that are used today didn't exist 25 years ago, probably when I started my career. So you have to keep adapting and learning those, but the fundamental things that I do with most of the tools hasn't significantly changed.
Bonnie, I'd like to jump in on that as well. I think the languages, you need to have some tools to be able to do the things that you want to accomplish, but it's I'm going to call it the meta skills. And I'm going to talk a little bit about SQL skills, right? And being able to write and run SQL queries really has helped. I call it data debugging, where I can reason about data. And I think in all kinds of data science, if you can do good data debugging, independent of language, you're on your path to success. It's just so fundamental. And I think when I'm talking with people that I'm mentoring, I try to get them to reason about data and debug data and understand why things should roll up, and if they don't roll up, why that should be a concern and why we should look at it. So, you know, independent of language, that reasoning about data, I think, is one of the most important things that we need to be able to do as data scientists.
Yeah, completely with you, Wendy and Bethany, and I'd like to add that the tools are constantly evolving. So I think one thing to really be aware of too is that don't recreate the wheel. There are so many good packages out there that you can leverage, and really good plotting tools. And something I recommend to people I work with as well is look at how other people plot data. You can get really good visualization ideas. We're not all trained as graphic artists, but get those ideas of how to really succinctly describe your data so that you can see quickly where the bad data are or how to communicate your data. So I think you can find lots of really good examples out in the world for that as well.
I'd like to share my thoughts as a senior business leader in terms of, just echoing what was just said from Jennifer on the importance of communication. While I'm pretty technically savvy, I think I'm probably in a small group of leaders who understand technology. And so it's really, really important to learn the business and to be able to understand how to talk to senior leaders in the business and put things in, I'm going to say, non-technical ways and present them in ways that are really easy to digest. Otherwise, we tend to get kind of lost in the conversation about, what does that really mean? And I don't necessarily think that we need to know the how and the guts of the things that are being done, but really being able to communicate what is the business impact and what do these things do to the organization, and what kind of value will they bring and what will change. So thinking about those kinds of things that are not specifically about tools are extremely important in communications.
And I think just off of that, who you're talking to is important. So obviously technical details when you're having a peer review or somebody who is concerned about the nuts and bolts of, is this a good model? Is this a valid model? Is it going to be generalizable? Some things that get down into the weeds of it, that's one kind of conversation. When you're talking about now that's been vetted out and here's how the business is going to use it and the decision that it's going to make easier, or the action you can automate now, or whatever it may be, nobody there is going to care about how that sausage got made. Just that you've done, like, did we do this? Yes, check. We validated that the model's a good model. Move on to what we're going to do with it now. So just having knowing that you're going to have to talk to different audiences about the same thing in vastly different ways.
I think that goes back to, for me too, to the data debugging. I want to know that I'm solid, right? So that but to Sherri's point, when you're presenting those results, nobody wants to hear about your data debugging, right? But you have to do that to be able to walk into the room and be confident that what you're sharing is legit, right? It's lined up with the data. You've really come to a data-driven conclusion that you can rely on. But then you're going to talk about the other stuff. Why is this important? But if I don't do those data checks, and I will really highlight what Jennifer said about the visualization, that the strength of really good visualization tools to help you with your data checks. You can find inconsistencies really quickly if you're nimble with your visualization tools. And then I feel confident that what I'm doing next is solving the problem, not having shaky questions about, well, does that data really mean that? So you got to have that foundation and then put it away when you go talk to the business leaders.
I think it's even helpful to recognize that there's different kinds of business leaders that you're dealing with on a regular basis too. So that once you've got that confidence in your results, knowing if you're talking to the project team that's been with you along that whole journey versus their leadership that might know about it at a high level, but not the details, versus somebody who's completely new to it, helps you frame up the conversation in a way that you can help convey the value of what the team has done and how to interpret those results, but without getting into the weeds and a lot of the different details that their eyes might gloss over on.
Wendy touched on a point that is a particular point for me, which was visualizing your data early. I've heard too many people over the years say that data visualization is a pretty picture you put on at the end. But for goodness sakes, people, your visual cortex is 30% of your brain. So if you're not visualizing your data, you're not using all of your sensory mechanisms to look at the data. You should do it early and often.
Let me add in too that visualization is really good for communication. I'll just go with a really simple example.
What about professional skepticism?
Bonnie, let me just make one more point about visualization. It's also a communication tool, right? So it's not a pretty picture at the end, but it is a communication tool to help your stakeholders understand what you're seeing in the data. I'll give the simplest example. Does anybody have a clean customer master? Anyone? Anyone? Right? There's always, I've never been anywhere where there haven't been 14 different ways to spell customer names and that sort of thing. And I find that stuff immediately, right? I pull it into visualization tool and go, oh, look at all the different ways we're spelling customer X. And even just to be able to show that to somebody, because it's really hard. I can say things like, hey, we don't have a clean customer master. And what does that mean? Well, it means that I can't really aggregate all the versions of customer X until we sort that out. And that being able to communicate that and how important that is, visualization works just great for that.
Right. It does. And when you're really focused on your business-driven outcomes, that helps communicate with the business people early and often. Somebody else was speaking. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that being able to show people that is very important, because I think people think a lot of magic happens in computers these days, and they don't understand that, mixed case is not the same as all caps or lowercase, and that the computer still sees that differently. And even though it's simple for us, there's a lot that's still simple for people that's very complicated for computers. And I think that people have done such a good job of selling AI and a lot of the advanced capabilities. People don't recognize the vast amount of tedious, painstaking, labor-intensive work that has happened in the background to make it happen, like autonomous cars, but a car can see this. Okay, but there's people marking pictures by hand, like millions of them for the computer to learn off of. It doesn't just like happen out of the blue that the computer can tell what a curb looks like, and so I think that's where there's a big disconnect between a lot of what we do and people in the business's expectation of what you can do in the time it takes to do those things.
What about professional skepticism? What do we think about that? That you should always. I think you started to touch on it, Bethany.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen things that companies that present themselves as having a magic bullet of they'll clean up all your data. I don't believe for one second that any of those companies, I'm like, you're going to sell something that's expensive, and I doubt that it's ever going to fulfill what you say it's going to. Because I've seen things where it's 1, 2, 3 is the coding over here, and then it's all written out in words over here. And the distribution of how frequently those things are occurring is different. So there's like absolutely nothing that you have that's ever going to enable you to just magically connect those, other than the hard work of understanding what's in the data and understanding the business and the processes that are creating each of those data sets. So I call it like data investigation is, and I think that goes to what you were talking about, Wendy. It never goes away, and it's so foundational and something that only experience can help you really do. I've had people who've worked for me who've kind of banged their head against the wall about something, and I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, you probably need to do A, B, C, D. And they're like, how on earth could you have known that? It's like, because I've solved this problem 5 times, and that's the only reason. It took me hours and hours the first time too.
And I'll go back to the data debugging. Right. So when I'm working and mentoring somebody who's new, a big thing that I want them to be able to do is to think about, if I had X records on the left, and then I joined them to Y records on the right, what should I see? What is reasonable? If I start dropping off records when I have a data pipeline, I want to engender that kind of spidey sense, right? And that skepticism, wait, that shouldn't happen. Wait, that doesn't make sense. And I think that's another part to me of professional skepticism is don't ever trust your data, right? I mean, I until I see it, then I'll trust it. But I want to understand why I lose records or gain records, and in cases where I shouldn't get more, why is that? That means there's probably some repetition. And some of that just, like you're saying, Bethany, it just comes with experience. But I also think, and what I try to do coaching wise is to expect that. Expect that something screwy is going to happen, and be ready to be able to tell why that happened and how you're going to resolve it. Over time, you will learn that trimming a string can do wonders for you in joins, simple things like that. But the first thing is just think about, I have so many rows of stuff. I added so many rows of stuff. How much stuff should I get? If you get that reasoning down, I think that helps tremendously with being able to be solid and confident in what you're producing.
I think it's also healthy to have professional skepticism about the results of your analysis and the outcomes of your models. And one way you need to do that is to be checking in with the people that are experienced in the business. In many cases, data scientists or analysts are working on different parts of the business, and you need to have a trusted partner to go and just make sure that the results even make sense. So as you do some of your initial modeling, go and see what the prevalence of a particular disease state is. Is that representative for what you should be seeing in your data? And knowing what your data set is, if it's a certain subpopulation of the whole, and what you might expect to see will help you also make good decisions and choices about whether or not certain models or certain types of analytics are working for you.
Bonnie, I'm going to put a bit of a different spin on the professional skeptics. When you think about, senior business leaders, someone who's extremely experienced, has been leading that business for, 20 years, and all of a sudden we have a new insight that is maybe contradictory to what that leader believes. And so really being able to talk about the data, how you got to the conclusion you did and what you did to it, it's going to add a lot of credibility to that business leader, and being able to explain what you've done, what you've used to get there, which will help take away some of those business skeptics. But you might still run into them occasionally, but at least with being able to articulate what you're doing and why, I think it's really, really important for that group of consumers.
Jennifer, I think you had something you wanted to add.
Yes, thank you. The skill sets I really encourage people to develop is challenging assumptions and being able to ask really good questions. So I think everyone brought up really good points about, usually as data scientists, we're brought into a situation, we may not be experts with that data, but being able to ask really good questions of the business experts that own that data, being able to challenge some of their assumptions, that really helps build up better understanding and a better set of questions you can then ask of the data and make decisions from.
Other comments here? So what about doing QA? We've had a lot of comments about things that are not very glamorous, but that you have to do. You have to clean your data. You have to know your data. You have to look at it in detail. There's a bunch of stuff that is plumbing that is required to be done, and it isn't the glamorous stuff. And people coming right out of newly minted master's programs in analytics have been exposed to the fancy, fun algorithms that give you these amazing results, but only on a really clean, really well understood data set. And I don't think that those programs, which were put in place for good reasons, MGI published a report a few years ago saying that we were vastly underrepresented in our ability to have data scientists and data science leaders. And so many programs stood up, different university programs at that time. But I think that we do people a disservice by not letting them know that a lot of our work is that data cleansing and things like that. So what about traditional approaches like quality assurance reviews? And can those be thrown by the wayside, or are they still necessary? And how do we implement that kind of rigor in the organizations with which we work?
I mean, I think that they're all the more important. More data is more complexity and messiness. It's not, the data is no cleaner today than it was 20 years ago. There's just more of it with more ways to be dirty. So, and I find a lot of people just program and assume that their programs are doing exactly what they think they should be doing. And to your point, Wendy, the data is just what somebody told them it was going to be. And so they just kind of move stuff along through pipes without thinking too much about it. I think that it's just all the more necessary. I think that there's a lot that can be automated if you're working with the same data over and over again to make sure your pipes work the right way, because they break. Do you have the same number? Do you have an expectation of just the number of transactions that should be in your data? Do you have, if it's revenues, how much should it line up to for a certain period of time, like within certain bounds that, do you have something that's like 10 times what you normally expect? That should be a red flag to you. Because I've seen a lot of things happen where people just blindly shove data through whole processes. And then it's not till the 11th hour when they're supposed to be delivering it to a client that somebody looks and goes, hey, that doesn't really make sense. That's more than the company makes in 3 years, And suddenly, like, all hell breaks loose and everybody's kind of scrambling to try to figure out what's wrong. When if you just set up some systems at the very beginning, you would have saved everybody a whole lot of time and aggravation.
So what would you say? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that those sanity checks that Bethany's talking about, I'll continue on my theme of data debugging, right? I just have some foundations of what should you expect. I mostly work with time series telematics data. How much can a population of refrigeration units generate in a year? are numbers in the billions reasonable, or numbers only in the thousands reasonable? And you have to develop that about your data set. But then when the teams are presenting work to me, those are some of the big things that I'm looking for. Is, does that make sense? Does it capture what we'd expect, and kind of a baseline that we understand? And what we do for QA reviews is we meet weekly, and before it goes out to an internal client, the work is presented to me, and I try to put myself in the seat of the internal client. Right? Does this all make sense? Does it line up? Does it? So I would say our QA reviews aren't, it's not necessarily a formalized process like we would do in software, but it's more a series of data checks, and do I believe the content that I'm getting back?
One tool
What
I found.
about if you're a new joiner to a company? What about if you're one of these newly minted master's students? Go ahead, Karla.
Sorry, I had one more comment about just maybe a practical tip for QA. One thing that I've found is a checklist. Pilots use them before they take off on a plane. Surgeons use them before they cut somebody open. And data scientists should probably think about using them too before they release a model out into the wild. And just making sure that the right processes have been followed, that the right things have been thought through. And putting a little structure behind it just allows the teams to make sure that they are releasing a quality product. So I've seen that approach work well in the past.
So what about if you're a new joiner to a company, you're a new data scientist, and you don't have a sense of the business, you don't understand the domain you're working in? What would be some strategies you would coach that person to help them develop this checklist or get these sanity checks to make sure that their outcomes are within the boundaries of the business? We work a lot with business-driven outcomes. We start from the business-driven outcome, and then we work back to the data at our organization. But what would a relatively new joiner with very little experience in the industry do?
I guess I would recommend to them to just go sit with, their counterpart expert in that business or division to really get some day-to-day expertise of how they're using the data, decisions they need to make from the data to really understand what the important features are. And then once they get a handle of that, have them start digging into the data, showing them what they're seeing, share that with the business partner to make sure that they're aligned, and then hopefully they can start doing some more independent analyses to level up what the business is able to do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people underestimate that how much business you need to know, right? I think people think like, I do data science and somehow that's not business. But, either you have to be very open to collaboration with you do need to be open to the collaboration, but the more you can internalize about how the business works. I like to say, like, data happens to most companies. It's what, they're operating to deliver something to their customers, and data kind of comes along the way. There's relatively few companies I've encountered that have a true good data strategy from the beginning and are completely thoughtful about what's in place. And so understanding all of those processes and systems that are creating the data will help you to better understand where you can apply it in a reasonable way, or and where it might actually really be impactful, or where it might give you some sort of odd results or not really be the appropriate thing to do. So, and people relationships are the only way you know that anywhere.
Yeah, nothing is ever completely documented, ever.
Hardly ever documented at all.
Yeah, and I'd say, so I mostly work in IoT kinds of applications. So I'm getting data that's generated by machines the vast majority of the time. So how do you get to understand that kind of data? If that's your newly minted grad and that's the area you're going to work in, part of it is, I'm trying to keep my cat out of the screen. Part of it is go read the specs, find out where the specs are. Somebody designed a machine to make that data. Go take a look at the specs and then find the SMEs, the subject matter experts, and talk to them. Right? Because there will be a spec that will say how the thing was designed, and then there'll be how it was implemented. And alas, those are not the same, right? We'd like them to always be the same, but in most cases, there's some subtle differences. You need that SME to really help you understand what you're interpreting. So that's what I think about in the IoT world. Where's the spec? How can I get at it? If there's a data dictionary, that would be great. That's often not true, but if there's one, that'd be great. And then who's a subject matter expert that's actually going to help me interpret what I'm seeing here?
I would just add that for anyone in any new job, I think it's a great way to start out a new job is to go and see. If you have that opportunity, if you're co-located in a factory, spend a day walking around the factory and understanding what is going on. And if you have a specific project that you're being asked to either participate in or to actually do, try to go and see it. Wendy just said a great example. If you have an IoT project, go out and look at the equipment and understand who's working on it and ask them what keeps them up at night, and just understand as much as you can. But I think that is applicable in my view to just any job, any new job you have. Take that opportunity and go and see.
And I would add that's hard to do, because as a newly hired data scientist, you feel like I've been brought in to analyze some data. Give me some data. I want to analyze it. I want to get going. I want to produce something. I want to show what I can do. I want to prove myself here. And you're coming from an environment in education where you are given an assignment and then you produce the results and you're in this cycle. But in business, it isn't always as clear cut. The data isn't as clean. It isn't as well understood. And so have a conversation with your manager about how important it is for you to understand the business, how you want to use the relationships that your manager has in place, that your leader has in place, to help you start to build your network of people in the business who really are going to use this and will understand why you're doing it and can do that for you. And it's a different feeling. You're asking for something you've never asked for before. You never were told by a professor that you had to go out and meet people and build relationships. Our discipline is notorious for having people who want to do the data and do that. And we don't always select for extroverts, I'll just say. So this is, out of a lot of people's comfort zone, but the degree to which you can do that now will pay off in the future, I think, very strongly in your ability to build those relationships and have that network of people that you can use for these questions.
And I would say I'm a very much an introvert, and I have worked very hard over time to be able to talk to people, and be more forthcoming. It's not something, it's just something you have to work at and chip away at. And then have your time afterwards where you can go collect yourself and get over it.
And speaking as a manager, I am very supportive of people asking about how do I learn more about the business? Who can I talk to in the organization to help me learn about this project? Can I go spend a day traveling with a salesperson or a day on the factory floor? Those are sorts of things I'm very supportive of. So yeah, definitely encourage people to think about that and to ask those questions and to seek out those opportunities, because it really does pay off in the long run.
A really helpful thing. So I'm Bonnie read on how many decades I was at Honeywell. So I'm definitely not a new hire, but I changed companies, right? And so I was in a new domain. One of the things that I was able to do was to take the training class that our technicians take, right? And coolest thing, I mean, I learned some things. I'm really bad with a refrigeration wrench. So, you know, that's probably not my forte. I'm in the right kind of career. But I learned things about you just watching the units work and starting them up, but then also watching the people. So in a class with a bunch of people, you know, Sherri's saying, you know, go to watch and go see the people who use the things that you produce. It was really insightful. You know, just watching them and then talking to them about, well, how do you get data when you're working in the dealership, and then realizing some of the challenges that they had and things that would be beneficial for them to have in their role. I get so much out of that. You know, it was a week's worth of training, you know, greasy hands and refrigerant on my hands and all kinds of stuff, but it was really, really beneficial. So if you're working, you know, I'd say in a physical domain, that sort of thing, go train with the technicians, find out how the stuff works. And that was something that when I came into the company was one of the first things that I did. And it was great.
Wendy, while you're speaking, you have a particular passion for reproducibility.
Oh, yes, I do.
Did you want to talk about that?
I sure will. Yeah.
And for the record, I'm older than Wendy. So there you go, if that helps, Wendy.
Well, you know, 3 decades I've gotten some scar tissue around reproducibility. So I'm really, really passionate about reproducibility. If you haven't heard that term, you know, you somebody hasn't said, is your work reproducible? Spend some time looking into this. I'll just give you my quick synopsis, right? Your work should be able to be recreated without human intervention, in my opinion. Right? Other people may think about this differently, but can you go from the data that you have to the conclusion that you got to? Can you do that reliably in an automated way? Are the steps consistent? And I get really, really concerned when I'm doing analysis. And yep, I did some of this morning. I did stuff in Excel and I had a bunch of formulas in there, but my worries about the things that I can do and the mistakes I can make go way higher when I'm working with something more manually. So I'm really, really insistent on our team that the work should be reproducible, which means what I always say is I should be able to go run your code to create results without any special intervention that happens on your personal laptop with your hands. And the reason I'm so crazy passionate about that is you will always have a project that gets stopped and started later on, right? Even if it's all your own work, you're going to come back to and go, now, what was I doing in here 6 months ago? I've got one of those right now. We're restarting a project, and right, the fact that was able to use, in my case, I like to use R Markdown. I've got an R Markdown document that I can just generate all the work, and I'm right back to where I was in January. And I cannot say enough about how valuable I think that is.
And on that, comments are still something that are far too frequently left by the wayside when people are coding. And to your point, it's not just for the other people who need to go in, though it's invaluable for them. I have gone back in, you know, anybody who codes goes back in and is like, why did I do this weird thing here? And there was probably a really good reason for it but you just need even like a little, you know, half a sentence. It's not even a full sentence to just say like, hey, there was this anomaly, like trigger your memory as to like why the heck you did this weird thing here to account for something you learned along the way. And then you can figure, you know, it makes it much easier to read through when you know what it's supposed to be doing.
It's a very weird feeling when you go back and look at some code that you wrote and you think, this is really good. Oh, I
did this,
right? I've had that experience. So
that was clever of me.
Yeah, very nice. Oh, this was me. Yeah, future you will greatly appreciate what current you does when you're documenting and making your work reproducible.
I loved the giggle that arose from all the presenters, the recognition of a shared experience. I thought that was just great. Dan, we're getting close to being down to the last 15 minutes. And before I ask another question, I was wondering if there are some questions coming in over chat. that we should be attending to. And I wonder if you wanted to talk about the follow-on session to this as well. You want to take a minute to do that, Dan?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Say after, when this ends, we're going to go into a gather town. It's sort of like when the panelists are over and you leave the auditorium and you all hang out outside and walk up to people you know or and people you don't know and engage in conversations. It's a new trial for us, but we think it might get a lot closer to what our real conferences are like. So you should have an invitation for that. We will share the link, and I will tell you the password is MA Mondays right now. So we'll get the link out there, but pay attention to the password. And we'd want to avoid people bombing us, but we don't think we'll have too much of that. And then the first question I have is, what visualizations on a dashboard really gets your attention? And what is your go-to graph?
Ooh, great question.
See, I think that's a backward question. You shouldn't have a go-to graph. It should be based on what are you trying to show. And that should be the determining factor, not because you like the graph, but because the graph is what's called for what you're trying to show.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's very much situational. I would say no pie charts. But other than that, we're using visualization tools like Tableau. They'll even help you pick the right graph for the data you have and the point you're trying to prove. And then there's just a lot of resources out there to help you get the right one and help communicate your story appropriately.
I'll say for me,
Go ahead, Wendy.
I'll say for me, so much of what I do involves time series, right? So I work in time series all the time, and a time series chart obviously that's fundamental to a lot of looking at sensor data and that sort of thing. But when you think about the other things you can put on a time series chart to give context, annotations, a second axis that shows you when the interesting stuff happens. Using color appropriately so you can highlight portions of the chart to draw attention, right? You're going to tell a story with that time series. That addition of context is really important. And then I'll have to say, look, time series charts that are in small multiples, which is a Edward Tufte concept, where I'm looking at lots of time series charts. I'm waving my hands, you can't see that, but like putting small time series charts onto a calendar or onto a grid, that can be really powerful because it resonates with the way people think about data, right? People think in calendars, right? And if you communicate with calendars, especially for stuff like, time of day usage and that sort of thing, it works really well to help your audience understand what you're sharing.
Yeah, as a consumer of data, a lot of data as a CFO, I think about things that help call my attention to abnormal things that are happening within the data. So things that help leaders call out, those anomalies. I think about color and, context or texts themselves as good indicators to draw attention to people like myself, where you can see something within, a few seconds, like, oh, I've got something here that is not looking like the rest, and I can immediately see that. So I would say keep it simple as can be, and use those colors and those fonts and things like that to help draw out the things that you're trying to call attention to.
I think that's also a generally good dashboard strategy of it's not about showing everything. It's about trying to show something that can help the business person take some kind of action and drawing their attention to that, rather than I looked at 100 things, here are all 100 things I looked at, but here's the 5 things that look weird. These are the things that you should go dig around in some more.
Yeah, I got a rapid fire question here. Top languages to learn as a beginner.
Python.
These days, Python, I would say.
Python.
I'd say Python too. If you're going to learn R, learn the tidyverse. That's going to give you, in either language, you're going to learn the, you got to learn the libraries, right? You've got to learn your go-to libraries. So pick a language, be good at it. And I would agree Python's probably more flexible. And there's a lot of momentum there, but get your libraries down and kind of decide what it is you want to accomplish. And I would say, first of all, get your data processing pipeline in whatever language you learn, get that down.
And I would also advocate don't blindly apply complex algorithms without understanding what they do, because I've seen that happen. Like just because stuff goes in and out of it doesn't make it right.
Another question here, and outside of going to MinneAnalytics events, how do you keep up with emerging technologies and languages? It's so overwhelming.
So I'm a huge advocate of technology. I love to just, read about emerging technologies. If you Google it, even you'll get, things that pop up. I'm always looking at things like the Gardner or Forrester type of reports, places where you can go that will help you evaluate and call out what is new in a particular space. But I'm a big fan of Google. And it's great. This type of a forum, as Stan just mentioned, is a fabulous way to learn about the new technologies.
I have a few people I like to follow on Twitter. It's kind of consume.
I just checked on. Go ahead.
I said pick some thought leaders. Find some thought leaders in the area that you're in. So I follow some on Twitter. I follow some blog posting blogs, and then you'll typically have some linking as you go from one to another. But I would think about what it is, the area you're working in, and try and identify who those thought leaders are. Right? If you want to work in deep learning, follow Andrew Ng, and then if you see who follows him, then you can pick up on some other good blogs and thought leaders to follow. That's how, and then I also have constant like email feeds. I have an email feed from Medium and a few different places, and from Katie Nuggets is a great place. And you get those email feeds, and then you'll find some branching. You're going to identify who the thought leaders are, and that's how I tackle it. I agree. There's an enormous amount of information out there. Pick a few people and kind of latch on to where they're going, because I think that'll help you focus.
I think too, there's at some point you have to decide a little bit if you're going to be kind of a specialist or a generalist, and then how deep you go.
Final question. Go ahead.
Or how broad you go in any kind of area will be determined by that as well. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Okay, we have a question from Kate. Do you think
Last question real quick. We'll just go around the horn and I'll call you name or, go ahead.
Yeah, do you think there are career opportunities for people who are not technical experts, but want to learn and bring business experience into the communications and introduce inverted kind? That's got 8 minutes.
Yes, I would. Go ahead, Sherri.
I feel pretty passionate about this one. As most of you know, I am not a data scientist. I am a finance leader at heart. And I am absolutely fascinated by the data science areas. And I think understanding what can be done, depending on what role you're in, and being able to either contribute by explaining some of the challenges that are in that particular function on a day-to-day basis, and also, learning how to apply these different types of algorithms and decision-making. It can be extremely helpful to the data science teams to really help them understand what to solve for. And so I would highly encourage non-technical people to think about what they do, think about what your area, your function does, and how, what kind of things you need to help improve, or where is that trapped value sitting at, and help the data science teams understand more about those specific situations.
Yeah, I think this kind of role and kind of skill set where you have people more from the business side, but who have, maybe they can't build a model, but they understand at a high level a lot of the issues and things around it and kind of fundamentals, and can advocate and be good partners and help other people to just evangelize across the company and help to bridge the gap, because there is often sort of this chasm between the very technical people and the business side of things. So the more you can bridge that gap, whether you're coming from the business side or the technical side, the better off you'll be.
And I think, you know, those things that we talked about with sanity checks and developing your spidey sense and the data debugging, right? Somebody's coming from the business side is going to have like the gut knowledge about what makes sense about the business. That's invaluable. So you got to have both sides of it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity kind of in that. Actually, I know companies that are hiring people that are in the translator role, right? So working both in the business domain and then in the data science domain, and really bridging the communication. Because let's face it, if the data scientist does a great job on a model, but the business can't figure out how to use it, right? Big deal, right? So there absolutely is a need for that bridging role.
Okay, let's go ahead, Bonnie, take it away for final thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to give everybody one chance to do a final thought. If you were given one piece of advice early in your career that you think is useful that you would pass on, what would it be? And I'll start. I was coached early in my career to never lose my technical chops, to always stay connected with the technology as deeply as I could, because that would get me credibility, but then other soft skills and other things like that would help me communicate them and move forward with it. Bethany, do you want to give one piece of advice to someone who's new in the field?
Yeah, I would say to really learn what the fundamentals of what you're doing. Again, like I think a lot of people get into algorithms, and especially it's very easy to implement algorithms these days, but to really understand the real science behind that and what are the assumptions, because there are assumptions, whether you know them or not, about how that should be working. And making sure that you're not kind of blindly doing something just because it's like the cool algorithm to apply, but that you're really taking the time to learn what that is will get you very far.
Wendy?
I would say that your early career advice for me, now I was really quite introverted, maybe still am, but I was quite introverted and wasn't necessarily communicating all that I knew all the time. And I had someone early on in my career say, get your thoughts out on the table. So, you know, all the things we're giving all this guidance about, you know, things you need to learn with experience, and that's absolutely true. But if you're coming out of college and you've seen things, you have things to bring to the table. Get them out there and get the discussion. And even, you know, if you get shut down or you don't get real positive feedback, don't let that get you, right? You're bringing something to the data, and there's so much need. There's so much need for people to understand data and be able to work with it. So just get out there and get your thoughts and get them on the table.
Sherri?
I am also introverted. I 100% agree with what Wendy just said. Take those little baby steps to get comfortable, and also really think about those communication skills. You know, that's going to take you just as far. So asking good questions is really important, and just trying to, you know, synthesize your answers as well. That will really help a lot.
When we talk about introverts or bring something to the table, even though you're new, one phrase I've used a lot has been, I'm new around here. I get this question. It like gives you permission to not understand something and to learn from it and say, am I seeing a disconnect here? And sometimes you get told, yep, that's the way it is. That's the way the field is, or that's always a problem. Sometimes you get told, oh, no, well, you're not seeing this part of it. But either way you learn. And that gives you permission to say what might feel like a half-baked idea to you. And I use it so much that I was on a project where after about 6 months, somebody called me up and said, you know, you're not new around here anymore. But I don't care. You know, that being new is not, everybody knows you're new. There's nothing wrong with it. You're not stupid. You're not uninformed. You know, it's really a get out of jail free card that helps people formulate questions. Jennifer?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that, really honing that skill set and asking really good questions. I agree. You know, I'm also introvert. Being able to ask
Jennifer,
questions
did you want to weigh in?
help me address my fear, I guess, of speaking up. So just the ability to ask questions, to come at it with curiosity and to learn more, I think is really key.
I'm having enough glitches that you started answering and I didn't hear it, but I'm sure that everybody benefited from your wisdom. It was probably just me. Karla, did you want to say something?
Sure. So great points brought up. Asking questions and participating, I think, are huge. My other piece of advice, a little general, is never say no to a hypothetical. There are so many things that are changing out there right now. You never know when that new opportunity is going to present itself. So be open to those new opportunities, be open to the new things that you're learning, because that can open doors for you down the road.
Great. It's hard to go last, especially with such great thinkers as we have on this panel. So that was a great point. Thanks, Karla. Dan, I think we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, okay, so we're going to cut out to the lobby. I want to thank everybody for being here, and hopefully some of you can join us outside, so to speak. New experience for us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.